Hello. What do you say we all get up? My name is David Cancel. We all get up, we leave, and let's go to the pub. All right, who's in? Let's go. Oh, this is not a party crew here. So I'm here to talk about the one thing you can do to improve your retention. Not a lot of charts, not a lot of data. It'll just be fun, right? So my background, I won't read all that stuff. I'm on to my 5th startup at this point. I'd say, my story is simple. I'm a street kid from New York City, right? I have no background, no pedigree, and not even a college degree. I dropped out of school. And the reason that I dropped out of school is what brought me here, right? This was like early days, 28K modems, Netscape had just come out, and I became obsessed with the internet, right? I was studying CS, and I just became obsessed with this idea of creating software and someone actually reacting to that software and sending me a message, right? I had created this early website while still in school, and got it on the What's Cool, if you remember that. That was kind of like the start page. And I got an email one day from someone in Russia, and all he said was like, "Your website's really cool, man." And that began this journey, right? That was like that blew my mind. I was like, because up until then I had been writing desktop software, and you're just so separated from anyone who ever used your software, right? So what was the point? And so that began this journey, and I started to become obsessed around one thing, which now in hindsight I can look back and say, wow, all my companies have been the same exact thing, right? Which have been, including my current company, Drift, which is this obsession with helping businesses communicate with their customers in different forms. And underlying that communication is this connection to people, which got me down this rabbit hole in the first place. So the thing that we'll talk about is this thing that I believe deeply, that there is this one change that you can make in your company that can help you improve customer retention. And when people hear this, they think, really? Like, is it really that simple, right? And I'm here to tell you that it really is that simple, right? It is really possible. But like all things that are simple, they're not easy. And the one thing that you can change within your company is this idea of aligning incentives, right? Back to people. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, has this great quote, which I use a lot, which is like the most important rule in management is getting the incentives right. A really simple statement, but almost no one gets this right, and no one figures this out. At the end of the day, we're all pretty predictable in our patterns as humans, and we need to get this thing right, which is aligning incentives, right? But like I said, this is like super simple. It's not easy, and that's why no one that I meet actually spends time to do this. So you may be asking yourself, like, which incentives? There's a lot of incentives that you can align. There are 2 categories of incentives in this. There are external incentives, and those are like the 3 Ps, right? The pricing, product, and promotion. And aligning that with your customers. Then there's number 2, there's internal incentives, and that's what we're going to talk about. And that's aligning your teams and departments to promote customer retention. And so there are lots of talks, and you probably just heard one, and you'll hear lots more and read lots of blog posts about like the first one, number 1, which is aligning incentives around the 3 Ps, pricing, product, promotion. But we're here to talk about number 2. And like, I'm still an 11-year-old deep inside, so when I say number 2, I think of this, right? And that, my daughter actually helped me pick that up, who's 11, pick that out. So how do we align the incentives of our departments, right? And so the best way to change behavior is to leverage cognitive bias. How many people here are marketers? None? Oh, 2. Have you guys spent much time thinking about cognitive biases? So as a marketer, you got to spend a lot of time. Huh? Yes, and we'll go into it. And so you have to, marketing is just the cognitive biases and understanding how to leverage those things, right? But there's only one bias in this case that we need to talk about, but ideally you should study all 25. And again, Charlie Munger, in his talk, The Psychology of Human Misjudgment, goes into all 25. And afterwards, you can go to this link. There's a YouTube video that someone recorded that you can see about the 25 biases. So the one that we're going to talk about today is what Charlie Munger would call the reward and punishment super response tendency bias. Sounds really wild and boring. But I think Benjamin Franklin probably says it better, which is like if you were to persuade, appeal to interest and not to reason, right? So what does that mean? That means incentives and disincentives. And how do you align incentives and disincentives within your team? Because incentives and disincentives, especially in marketing, especially in sales, rule everything around us, right? And the ultimate incentive is this one, right? That's the Wu-Tang Clan, right? I am from New York, right? So cash rules everything around me. That's the ultimate incentive is the dollar bill. But few businesses get this right. And so if you think about how you align your teams today, and you are what you measure, right? And there is a dark side to metrics, and I used to give a lot of talks back in the day about building a data-driven company, data-driven startup, and then at my time at HubSpot, which was a company before starting Drift, we were very obsessed around a data-driven culture. But there is a dark side to metrics, and we saw it firsthand, which is gaming, right? A lot of gaming. If you pick the wrong metrics, you can incent a lot of gaming within your teams. And so you have to pick metrics that are aligned with your customers, right? But most team metrics are, right? Like if we think about sales for a second, we'd say, especially in an early stage company, what are the incentives that we usually align around? New deals, right? And the velocity of those new deals. And so we overweight kind of incenting sales to close new deals, which we need. And we say, okay, the way that we're going to deal with them bringing on customers who are a bad fit, who may not work out, is to institute something like a clawback, right? And so clawback, in case a customer churns, so they're going to claw back revenue. But guess what? If you've talked to any sales rep, they don't give a shit about the clawback, right? Like they're trying to hit their numbers this month, right? And so to think that they're going to think about this customer may churn 3 months from now, and then I'm going to get a clawback. They don't actually think about those. They don't think about that. Even though you think that's a disincentive, that really doesn't come into play much. And during our time building sales team at HubSpot, we tried lots of different combinations of clawbacks and lots of different elaborate ways to make sure that sales was aligned with customers. But at the end of the day, they only cared about what actually kept them their job and made them money, which is new deals, right? And new deals are great, and we all need them, but new deals are not always aligned with the best customer experience and retention. And then in marketing, what do we usually look at? Marketing qualified leads, sales accepted leads, whatever you want to use. But at the end of the day, if you're a customer, there's not many of us who want to be an MQL or a sales accepted lead, right? And so that doesn't mean that they're going to push for the best customer experience. They're going to naturally start to push for how do I accelerate MQLs, and that may mean let me put up a gazillion forms and downloads and ebooks, and even though that we all know instinctually is probably like a shitty playbook, that's what's going to get me MQLs the fastest. That's what's going to make sure that everyone says I'm doing a good job, right? And then in product, and which is my background in engineering, what do we usually incent? If you're an agile company, which I don't think you should be if you're build internet-enabled software, but that's a different talk. But if you are, then it's velocity, story points, sprints, right? None of that has to do none of those things have anything to do with customers, right? That has nothing to do with is the customer happy? Are we satisfying our internal, external customers? Has nothing to do with it, right? So great that you committed N number of story points and you delivered that. Who gives a shit if you're a customer? They don't care about story points. So what is the solution, right? If the ways that we measure these departments don't work today, right? And I believe it's this kind of idea, which I talk a lot about, which is this customer-driven approach to building products and companies. And it comes down to this, designing every team's metrics to incentivize customer retention. And we'll go into examples of how do you do that. So before you do any radical change within your company, you need to establish some benchmarks and baselines. And if you don't do this today, a good thing to do is to establish a routine of NPS for your customers which stands for Net Promoter Score, and eNPS, Employee NPS, for your teams, and to look at that on a team-by-team basis. And the reason that this is important before instituting any metric changes, you want to see how changing these metrics are affecting the moods of your customer and your employees. So that's just an example of what NPS looks like, right? It's a 0 to 10 scale. How likely are you to recommend? Simple question. So let's dive into something like sales. Like, what could you do to incent sales to have better customer retention numbers? You know, we tried for many, 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 many years at HubSpot, and my last company, to come up with all newfangled ways to like incent sales with elaborate clawbacks and accelerators and all of this kind of stuff. And then what we settled on at the end, which worked the best, which is a very old school technique, right? Which is a territory-based model. So a lot of people who have sales teams, you know, may divvy it up by company size, may round robin leads that come in. And we went to something that you would do back in the day, which is a territory-based model, and say like every sales team or salesperson is going to be assigned to a specific territory. And that simple change changed the behavior of the sales rep to want to not sell bad deals. Why? Very simple. Because if my territory is New York City and I can only ever sell New York City, then I don't want to have a lot of pissed off leads in New York City because there's not any new territory for me to take, right? Versus being just at the end of a rotation of getting leads from any location, you don't really care. They're kind of like nameless. They're just coming in and, you know, it's marketing's job to rain more leads on me, right? Make it rain with leads. But territory all of a sudden got people thinking like, I better preserve this. I better work this deal longer instead of just trying to close it because new leads are not going to pop up in my territory. And along with territories, we made a change where we also incented upgrades. We moved upgrades to the reps, right? Because now that they own the territory, they could own new business and upsells, and comped upsells and new business the same, right? But before doing that change, we had upgrades as part of sales at one point, and but comped them lower than new deals, right? Because we were trying to incent new deals. So that was bad. We took upgrades out of sales, moved it into account management. That didn't work because account management and CSMs were great at preserving the customer, but weren't necessarily good at asking for money. And then we tried a matrix approach, which didn't work as well, as kind of splitting between account management and sales, and that was just too complicated. And then once we just did territories and said, sales, you own that customer forever, and rep, you own this territory forever, and you own upgrades and new sales, all of a sudden, churn problems started to fix themselves pretty quickly. It was pretty night and day. And then in marketing, what you can do is measuring leads is great. So MQLs, sales accepted leads are great. But what we would do is marry that with something like customer NPS and make marketing accountable for customer NPS. So it was not only leads, but making sure that customers were getting happier across, not only as a whole, but across different cohorts, different segments of those cohorts over time. And we were just looking at not only the score that they would give us, but we would always ask for open-ended feedback, and we would look through that open-ended feedback to make sure that we were going in the right direction for new sales, right? So like new sales that became customers, what was their NPS on the whole sales process and onboarding process? And then some people, we haven't done this yet, but some people have moved SDRs or BDRs into the marketing function, and they're saying that that has worked well too, so that they own the whole qualification process, right, within marketing. And that can help move churn. And then in engineering and product, what can you do in engineering and product? And that is my favorite part because, one, that's where I come from, but two, that's probably the department that, or the group or team that is usually the most disconnected from customers, right? Marketing, sales, services, and support are dealing with customers every day, but us in engineering and product are rarely talking to customers or rarely feeling customer pain, except through maybe secondhand or third-hand feedback, right? And so one thing that I've done for almost 10 years now is have engineers, product managers, designers, everyone involved with building products become part of the customer service process, right? And in the early days, we kind of stumbled upon this thing accidentally, because at my company, Performable, we were a small company, and we didn't have dedicated support, and so all of us took turns doing support, right? And not everyone was happy about that, right? Engineers were rarely happy about that. They sent me links to Paul Graham's Maker's Time, and how their time could not be disrupted, and they couldn't do customer support. But one thing, we stumbled upon one thing in that whole process, which was, I used to spend, as the de facto product manager back then, and CEO of the company, I would spend a lot of time trying to convince engineers to make a change because we were hearing feedback from customers, and aka run a drug deal with the engineers to get them to make something happen pretty quickly. And it took a lot of energy to try to convince engineers to do something, and there were lots of elaborate excuses of, we need to re-platform, we need to re-architect, we can't make that change, it's complicated. So I'm sure a lot of you have gone through that, but once we made them handle some portion of customer support, those same changes that we were asking for before got done like this, immediately. So we were in a small office, we noticed it, and so we started to talk to the engineers and say, why'd you make that change? You said it would take this amount of time, and they said, I talked to 3 customers, they just kept bringing up the same thing, so I just went in and fixed it. And it was like, wait, what? What just happened? And what just happened there is that we finally involved them in a feedback loop, right? Before that, when you're disconnected and you're not feeling the pain, there is no feedback loop. You create something, and you're not getting a response, a direct response, so you can't iterate. And all of a sudden, and our customers back at Performable and later HubSpot were marketers. And one side benefit of having this process in place is that our customers were blown away because, for the large part, most of them would say things like, oh, this engineer at your company fixed my problem. It was amazing, and they fixed it right away. And engineers in my own company, they don't even talk to me. They say that they won't talk to me. They said, there's a backlog. You can't talk. They won't do anything for me. But your engineers did something for me. And so this goodwill started to build up. And the more goodwill that built up, the more that we had things like customers sending gifts to the engineers, and the more that the engineers felt empowered, and the more that we were able to lean into increasing the level of autonomy that engineers would have. So this is something that I advocate. And later on, as you scale, later when I ran product and engineering at HubSpot, you got to a point where we had 200 engineers and product people, so it's hard, and we had dedicated support, but what we would have still is them shadow and get linked with people in support so that they were feeling the pain, right? Second thing that we would always do is this idea of internal customers, linking engineering and product with internal customers. And so this is how this idea looks. And so in our model, we would always have an engineering team, which was a 3-person team, and we would pick different people. We would have different departments pick someone from their department to link with the engineering team. And so we would say to, let's say, support, we say, for this product team, which is 3 engineers and a PM, they own this part of the product. You pick someone, nominate someone from support, from sales, from marketing, from success, that wants to be the product expert for that particular product that is owned by that team. Once they pick that team, that becomes those 2, the PM from that team and these 4 people have transparent metrics that they report on each month on things that they want engineering to be able to do based on customer feedback. So all of a sudden, it wasn't anyone else trying to push down that decision to engineering. It was that they worked with these people, and let's say an example would be support, where support might look at top call drivers for that product, and they would sort them and rank them how they wanted them, and then each month, them and the engineering team and the product team would have to report to the company and say, here are the call drivers that we took care of this month, right? Here's the 1, the 2, the 3, the 5, the 10 call drivers that we took care of. And if they didn't do it in a month, they also had to say, we didn't do anything this month to reduce call drivers. For sales, it was sales looking at win-loss analysis and looking at things that were coming up in competitive battles, and them sorting that as well and coming up with their wish list, and us saying, again, this is not an agreement for us, for engineering to say, we're going to build everything on this list. We're just saying, we're going to work off this list with you, and if we don't do anything, we'll be jointly responsible for that. And again, we did that with success, and we did that with product marketing. The point was to move that decision down to the actual people who are closest to the customer, in case these internal customers, and have them with the engineering team make these decisions on their own versus your directors, your VPs, or your CEO making those decisions. They got the autonomy, but they also had the flip side of autonomy, which is accountability, to make those decisions. So, and we also had we were able to get rid of product roadmaps. So that's a whole nother talk, which I don't like product roadmaps. But we were able to get rid of that kind of stuff within engineering. That was the give for engineering. Engineering, we don't have to have product roadmaps and some of these other things if you agree to be linked with these internal customers, right? And then finally, we measured each of the product teams on driving product adoption, and we looked at, from a usage standpoint, from an onboarding standpoint, and we looked at that and we continue to look at that from every possible cohort or segment view. And the main thing there is making sure that customers are using their product more over time, right? Those customers are also becoming bigger customers or upgrading over time, and that was a way that we would measure if they were affecting the customer or not. Not story points, not velocity charts, not any of that, but are we doing the stuff that we need to do with internal customers? Are we driving product adoption with our customers? And is usage frequency of the product going up across cohorts over time? So, and then lastly, the last thing we did was to have this kind of mantra of shipping to customers daily, right? And behind this idea is this notion that I talk a lot about, which is accepting that all of our ideas are wrong because none of us are the customer, right? And so let's get out in front of the customer as soon as possible and validate what we're doing. And as an engineer, and a PM, the last thing you want to do is build a product that nobody's going to use or value. So let's ship each day, right? And I used to say ship it so much that ended up on the wall, right? Over time. And then we had this idea of monthly science fairs as well. So we've talked a lot. I think it's very simple. I'm happy to answer any questions. It's very simple to affect your churn by properly aligning the incentives of your teams with the customer, right? And making sure that the customer is at the heart of everything that you're doing as a team. But it's a lot, and you need to take a deep breath. But everyone here can do this. So, well, thank you all.